Okay. Well, we're recording. We have audio.
You could make it. Like I have and like okay, I don't even know what like I know. I also have Phillips. Who's wrong with Phillips? Guys, yeah. I don't. Yeah, actually, that is what it was. Is it just like a stronger version?
All right.
More pairs.
Okay, 1 o'clock. We'll start to trick with soul. There's not no All right. How are you guys? Hello. Jeremy as well. That's good. Today we'll actually get into some cool actual fossil stuff after we spent the last lecture kind of talking about a bunch of the things that make mammals mammals, and the power of the fossil record to really show us a lot of these transformations. So like I said on Wednesday, here's a nice amount of skulls, 12 skulls there. Those are all synapsids, so amniote animals that are on our side of the tree. They're not related to reptiles, they're related to us, mammals. None of them is technically a mammal. We'll talk about what mammals are today. And all the things that make mammals seem weird from other amniotes, we can expect to see built over the course of like an evolutionary scenario. Some of these animals have some things. This one's more mammally than this one, but it's not full-on mammal. And so that's kind of the cool thing about fossils, I think, is they can really show us things. And so here's our timeline again. On the left here, millions of years are what these numbers are, 250, 275, 300, 325. I think simple statements like Darwin can come up with an idea that species change over time. But now, 150 years later, you and I can be like really intense and have a very tight debate on like 300 and how many exactly million years ago are we expecting to see the first synapsids. That's incredibly cool. Science can constrain these questions and let us ask better and better and better and better questions as it keeps going. And so reptiles and mammals both have lineages that go back about the same length. There's millions and millions of years of reptile evolution before we get to anything you guys recognize. There's no lizards, there's no turtles, there's no dinosaurs until way up here. Same thing's true for mammals. A lot of these weirdos that we're talking about today, you don't get little fuzzballs that probably have baby kind of milk until way up here. So what's going on in this range of time is really cool. We'll talk about that. There's a whole bunch of names for these animals. So like I said, the slides I'm showing you guys today are all from like my paleo classes. So it's like way TMI for this class, but I'm giving them to you so you can like look at them if you're interested. Scientists kind of have these names for different clades of these animals that we talk about, increasingly close to mammals: pelycosaurs, therapsids, cynodonts. You guys are therapsids and you are cynodonts, and so we're all living mammals. Whales are cynodonts. That's a cynodont. You're a cynodont. So we'll talk about that. So here's some of the early diversity of Synapsida. The gray bars are representing, again, the temporal duration of like the fossil record that we have. So this group here, Synaptodontidae, I think you recognize this animal. You've seen it before. Every time I go to the store, I see it toy up in one way or another. So you've seen it. This is when it comes from, way before there's any dinosaurs. It's not related to dinosaurs, it's related to us. And then these lines here, of course, are the phylogeny, how things are related. So here's our reptiles over here, forget about them. Weirdos down there, forget about them. We're going to stay on the mammal line here. And so again, we have names for all these things. A lot of these like pretty reptilian looking Carboniferous and early Permian synapsids are all kind of grouped together when people talk taxonomically as helicosaurs. Helicosaurs is not a clade though. There's no common ancestor that contains all of them. Some of them are more closely related to you and me than others. This is a word you might hear if you ever talk about mammal evolution and you go real deep. Again, really fun animals, very reptile-y, right? These are the ones like, that's the mammal relative, not a lizard thing. Yeah. So what are the features they have? Well, we'll talk about only a couple. And so again, there's another node. We don't have to worry about what it's called. There's one feature that shows up within helicosaurs. I'm kind of going to blast through them. I want to talk about you guys. It's more up here. There's one feature that we talked about on Wednesday that shows up about here. You don't see it here, or farther down the tree. So it's an evolutionary like polarity. We can see when the change probably happened. And this is when we first get that heterodonty in the teeth. Mammals have really special teeth. Crocodiles, sharks, lizards, frogs generally have the same kind of tooth all over their mouth, whereas you have incisors, canines, premolars, and molars. All mammals have this like pretty highly evolved dentition. And we begin to start to see that specialization of dentition in this Permian period. So heterodonty, of course, is different teeth. And so you can see this animal, the Metrodon, you guys have heard that name before? What does that name mean? Talk to your neighbor, break it down. What is that Metrodon? Probably literally Metro's like a metro. What else? It's hilarious. A lot of people know the name Dimetrodon. It's like one of the only not dinosaur names people kind of have in their brains. 2 measures of teeth. Dimetrodon. Hilarious. It's that easy. So all that means is on the maxilla here, they have an enlargement of these couple of teeth. Notice there's a few of them. These are called caniniform. They're not true canines, like exactly like yours, and there's several of them, but they're caniniform teeth. Dimetrodon is one of the big apex predators, especially in the places we have good fossils from, which in this case is like Texas, Oklahoma. It's pretty much the biggest terrestrial predator we know about at the time, and it's got these kind of what we would call rectorial teeth. Big old teeth here, big old teeth here. You can see how they kind of fit together. That's good for like biting, right? Slashing. This is a good predator animal. And so this is a very simple, this teeth, the serrations on this tooth and the actual overall shape of this tooth isn't so different from this one or this one, but the size functionally becomes kind of rectorial. This is a later Permian mammal relative at the rhapsid. You can see there's a similar pattern happening. A lot of the teeth are similar, but getting down to like closer to 1 or 2-ish caniniformy type teeth at a time. So this is just something we start to see. And again, I won't belabor it. That's the last time. I'll promise. I'll try my best to say it. What's great about fossils is they will help you see the order of those changes, right? If all you have is mammals and lizards today and you're trying to figure it out, does hair come first? Big brains come first? Does warm-bloodedness come first? One of the things we now know from fossils comes first is that sort of initial differentiation of the teeth. That's really cool to me. So obviously, there you go on these 2 animals here. And so I would mark that, and there it is, Dimetrodon. Because these animals are really popular, I like you to like see them. There's a lot more animals than just Dimetrodon, even in this one family, which is called Sphenacodontidae. You don't have to worry about that. But I just like you guys to kind of see all the differences. So Ceconodontosaurus has this like really low slung, like we think it's like a fish specialist. It's like associated with those kind of habitats, really long face. It still has the special teeth. There's other animals like Tinus condylus, Sphenacodon, that don't have those great big sails. You guys have probably heard. I mean, I think Dimetrodon is really popular because everyone wants to know, like, what is the deal with this sail? And there's a lot of really fun hypotheses. We're not going to talk about them today because why would we? But people like it because if these animals are reptile related, like all amniotes are amniotes, is it regulating its body temperature? Is it a cold-blooded animal that is now sort of becoming a little bit more able? Is that thing a giant sail to catch the sun's light or catch the breeze to like elevate or lower its own temperature? Got to tell you, that's a great idea. For like 100 years, there's really no evidence that that's the case. We don't really think that anymore. But you can see how an animal like this would inspire scientists to ask those kind of questions because they want to figure out how mammals eventually, like you and I, have a very intense and well-regulated homeothermic high energy endothermic system. Really fun. I think it's a great big sexy billboard, and that's probably all it is. There's a lot of animals that get sales, and that's usually what the deal kind of is. One thing that's really fun is there's a bunch of fossils now. People didn't even know, like, is this really a sail? Because all we have is the bones. Like, are they actually connected, or is it just like there's rods on its back? And then they found a bunch of really beautiful fossils in Texas where, like, at the base, it had been broken, and then it obviously, like, kept moving around and then healed. So there's these big, like, balls of gnarly bone where, like, a sail had broken and then fixed itself. So well, obviously there's skin connecting it then because it's still there, which I think is really cool. Anyway, lots of fun stuff. People talk about these sails. Maybe you guys care, maybe you don't. You'll get the slides if you want to look into it yourself. And so all these animals here on this slide that you've seen already, these are all different clades that are in that grade of animals, that sort of like 1, 2, 3, 4, it's this way, of animals I would call pelycosaurs. So we just talked about the sphenacodontids, which are there. Most of the rest of class today, I want to talk about these guys, the therapsids. These are the ones that are a little more later in the Permian. You guys are also a kind of therapsid because they have a lot of really, really exciting biological phenomena they can show us. So here's all these different therapsid lineages and how they're distributed up there in time. And so there's two characters that we can see here on this line because they all share them. So we can infer they evolved somewhere in here. Happy to take questions about that as we go. But one thing that's really fun is that I really want you guys to know that in the context of this lecture, we can talk about like getting towards a mammal. But what's great about biology, what you should absolutely expect out in the real world is none of these animals are looking up at the stars and being like, gosh, I hope I'm a mammal descendants, hope mammals come from me someday. That's not how it works. Several of these animals especially have features they share with us, but then they do things that are totally wild and do not become very mammal-y at all. We are one iteration of what you can do with these inherited features, but there's lots of other things, especially in this group, that totally worked for like 100 million years. They're not around anymore, but like there's lots of ways to like take these features and make interesting and biologically successful body plans. So the two characters I want to mention here are something you guys did bring up when we talked about mammal traits on Wednesday, which is our kind of like upright posture. Those early pelycosaurs are very much like an alligator or a lizard. Their arms and legs are way out to the side. Their femur and their humerus sticks sideways. And then once we get to these therapsids, there's a really beautiful fossil from Russia called Biatka gorgon. The humerus and the femur are very clearly rotated, and the limbs are up under. And so there's lots of things we can infer and measure and test when it comes to like energetic efficiency and locomotion. And so these animals have a much more mammalian gait. Their legs are much more vertical than their arms are, so they're a little bit like straight up like me, but then also a little bit sprawly in the front. But in all cases, we can see them sort of moving towards this like more upright posture. This animal, I think you'll agree, looks kind of doggy, but there's lots of things that it has different that you guys noticed on Wednesday, right? There's ribs all the way to here. Kind of a big tail for like a early mammal kind of thing. So it's getting there, right? And again, I know, one last time. Isn't it great that like you'd be like, there must be some kind of weird like half dog mammal reptile thing, right? And you're like, do you want to see 5,000 fossils of it? Because they did exist. That's true. Here they are, just like you'd expect. Maybe you wouldn't know every detail, but the idea should be in your mind. Great, we have fossils. We can talk about it. So, all right, if we get up into this group, obviously there's so much cool stuff. Paleo class, I would tell you all kinds of different specific things. But I want to talk about just a couple of these clades because they're so fun. Easily the most famous, probably, of all these are these animals called gorgonopsians, the gorgons. They are the small, medium, and large predators of like late and middle Permian. So like 260, 245, 255 million years ago. They're all over the world. Here's a great big one from Russia called Inostransevia. That's the whole real skeleton right there. So it looks kind of shabby, right? The bones themselves are like beat up and hundreds of millions of years old, but you can still put it all back together again, reconstruct it. This fantastic animal called Smilosukis right here. Some of these animals, I hope well, how about this before I say anything else? What do you guys notice about gorgons? What seems interesting about them? Chat with each other about that for just a second. What's like the big thing with gorgons? What's fun about gorgons? Yeah. The sabers are outrageous. This is the first evolution that we know of in the entire Earth history of like the saber-tooth morphotype. A bunch of cat and cat-like animals are going to figure that out later. These animals do it first. There's other animals that also do a kind of saber apex predator thing. Really, really, really interesting. Saber teeth are very expensive to make. They're very fragile. So it's not like you're just jumping on top of other animals and shredding them because you're going to break your teeth. So they're probably very precisely used. A lot of really, really, really strong evidence for animals like saber-tooth cats, using them for like only the like this part of the kill. And so that's what we wonder about these guys. Some of these gorgons are so extreme that they don't have any teeth other than the ones up front. So there's nothing behind the saber. That means there's almost no oral processing of food. It's just and then throwing it back, probably, which is getting pretty Komodo dragony, right? Pretty lizardy, which is cool. So it's not too familiar back here. A cat maybe has big sabers, but then it also has sharp teeth back here for like processing. No, this is just throwing it. And that's a real fossil. Isn't that fantastic? Don't you love it? Smilosukis is from South Africa. This is a colleague of mine. This is a saber that he found in Tanzania. And so you can see him holding it there. You can look at the size of it in his hand now that it's like scaled. And then you can look at this animal right here from this type of animal. And I will tell you right now, everyone loves this fossil so much, meaning me and all my colleagues and collaborators. This is the lower jaw saber. So that's this saber. So the big saber on this individual animal is like, that's a nightmare. It's also like this tall, like at the shoulders, probably. Real nightmare. Yeah. Yo. Of course. Yeah. So you're the one who like finds the fossils to be looking for fossils. You get to keep that, or do you have like you mean keep it like personally, like on my mantle kind of thing? Oh, I definitely have almost no interest in that personally. Almost all the research anybody ever really does is, of course, permitted public lands, whatever kinds of research could and should, I think, go to accredited repositories and museum collections. There are people who collect fossils like for themselves, of course. All the different countries of the world have different laws. Like the US, like vertebrate fossils are not allowed to be just kept. Like you can find it even with a permit, but then you can't put it on your shelf, give it to the museum. The permit you apply for says what you're gonna do. If you find a plant leaf or a snail shell, nobody cares, you can keep it. So that's some vertebrate figures. What a great question. Why don't I show you something in a second? Here's more Gorgon stuff because I love them so much. These are some of the animals I find. So like I said, I was in Zambia this summer finding fossils, including Gorgon, which is really cool. What's really fun to me is like all kinds of interesting biology can happen. All kinds of cool science can get into these animals. So I told you there's animals like that have serrations on their teeth. You guys might know your teeth have lots of tissue structures in them. There's dentin in your teeth, and there's an enamel layer on the side. Don't get a cavity because you can't rebuild your enamel, right? And so the way the knife serrations on saber teeth work is really interesting. And in fact, like saber-toothed cats, T-Rex, Gorgons, they all have different underlying tissue structures. And so the different material properties of their sabers compared to each other, even though they might all actually have, at a glance, a big sharp tooth with blades on the side, they do it differently. And so Gorgons and saber-toothed cats have a lot of things that are superficially similar, but the details are totally different. And that's really cool because it gives us insight into how like mammal tissue evolution works and the evolution of mammal dentition. Because obviously saber-toothed cats are like a long lost late cousin thing of this animal. One thing I like too is like, again, no one's ever seen a T-Rex eat anything, right? No one's ever seen a T-Rex eat anything, but I'm 100% sure it's a carnivore, right? It eats meat. What I like about fossils is sometimes, this is a very cool example of this fossil. It's a Tanzanian fossil, but it's in Germany. Interesting, colonialism. But this fossil had in its guts, when they prepped it, little dicynodonts, this kind of animal, inside of the chest cavity. And so if you have a different kind of animal inside your ribs, we're like, that you ate it. And that's nice, right? That's a cool kind of sign of like how science should work, right? Is understanding and reinforcing different lines of evidence for how we build like this ecosystem structure, this functional evolution. How many species of these animals can be on one landscape? One thing that's really cool about mammals is like there's a pretty tight trophic pyramid. Like if you go to Africa, there's like lions, hyenas, and leopards, I guess, a couple other things. Some of the ecosystems we find in the Permian, there's like 15 species of gorgons, and you're like, that seems like too many predators. But maybe the way they move energy around in their system is so different from how mammals do it that it works. These are fun biology questions I hope you think is cool. Here's a fossil that I found, so I want you to look at it because it's cool. I freaked out when I found this. It took me many minutes of like walking around and looking at it before I realized exactly what it was, and then I got really excited. So I wonder if you talk to each other and tell me what we're looking at here, because this is what it looks like when you actually find something. Go ahead and look at that. What do you see? So if you guys were walking, would you like take this and be like, oh, whoa, and get so excited, or would you just keep walking? That's question one. Well, it kind of is a rock, which is what's fun. That's cool. I get emails every week from people around Idaho that are like, here's the dinosaur I found. I have to tell them, no, you didn't. But people get excited, right? That's okay. You should get excited because sometimes they do actually have the thing they think they have. There was a guy who emailed me, well, now it's been a year almost since this guy emailed me, but he was like redoing his driveway. He lives like south of Boise. He's like, I got some horses in my yard. He did. He had like 20 very small early horses in his yard because he has the right rocks. That's great. So you should email the museum when you think you found something. But all right, what do we got? What are we seeing? Tooth maybe, where?
Right there.
You can hot and cold my shadow.
To the left a little bit. Your thumb's on it.
This? Tooth?
Back, right a little bit.
Tooth?
There, yeah.
All right. Other people? Could be a claw, same thing. Could be a claw. Okay, what else?
That's all I got.
So I'll tell you guys, I was excited. Like this ain't no rock, right? Look at that. That seems weird. So it's like a brown, normal looking rock with like a purple ringed white stripe in it. Worth your time to look at. This piece flips back on right there. So, okay, great. And I saw this texture, and I honestly, I was like, oh, this is a good fossil, but I have no idea what it is. Like I said, I walked around it. And then it did. It just snapped, and I didn't tell anybody. Everybody else I was with was walking around, and I got so excited, and I ran over to my backpack, and I was gonna like write about it and like photograph it before I told them what it was, because I knew 100% what it was as soon as it snapped in my head. This is what was cool, and this is why paleontology is the best. That's an eye socket right there. So you can imagine this like face has been in the ground for this one 254, 253 million years. And here it is like finally on the surface. It's the left eye. Here is that fossil, the same side as it exists now, prepped in a museum. So that's that same eyeball. So this is a Zambian specimen, but it is on loan to the University of Washington, and it is being prepped and studied at the University of Washington by me and other people. Ultimately, all these specimens do go back to Zambia. There's a museum there that they'll go to, but part of our permits and our agreements is we take them to the States to do all the museum work. This is like cool, but it's pretty shabby. This was the side that was facing up, right? So one thing that's cool is like, well, then what about the side that's facing down that hasn't had sun and rain on it for the last decade or whatever? Much nicer. Mm-hmm. It's one of my favorite fossils I've ever found. That's why I'm showing it to you. So nice incisoriform teeth, big ass canine, nice post canine, a little beat up back here, the brain and like sort of this eye socket are not so nice on the right hand side of the skull. But it's a really, really, really beautiful specimen. And so this is a genus called Dinogorgon. We didn't name it, but obviously hilarious, great name. Some fossils have great names. So Dinogorgon is the terrible gorgon, is what that really means. This is what gorgons look like. So this is from an art piece that I commissioned, like just to give you a sense of like what this animal looks like. It's one of the largest of the gorgons in that habitat. There's 3 others that are about the same size. So again, it's weird to have 3 or 4 large apex predators. They're all lion size, same habitat. They do have them. But there's a good sense of Dinogorgon. One thing I think that you guys could notice is what's going on right there. He's got 2 sabers. So you're a mammal today, and mammals mostly, not all, mostly are diphyodont, which means you have 2 teeth at each socket in your jaw for your whole life. If I punch any of you in the face and you lose a tooth, you don't grow a replacement. Sharks, alligators, lizards, almost all of the vertebrates, as many teeth all the time. And so what's interesting is we can do all kinds of science looking at the histology, the like cellular structure of the teeth, to like make estimates of how often these animals are replacing their teeth. So this is an animal that's getting a mammalian dentition in terms of its architecture, but it's still polyphyodont, still replacing its teeth all the time, including replacing its saber. There's lots of gorgons that have like 1 saber here and then like 2 or 3 sabers here because it's all in the different stages of being replaced. They're all coming in so fast. Really cool. Yeah. Izzy. Great question. First off, only 1 on this side, 2 on this side. So it'd be weird if they were asymmetrical. But also, teeth, when they fall out, always do the same kinds of things, even in sharks. So there's a resorption happening inside the skull right here for this tooth. The bottom of this tooth, I guarantee you, is like being eroded away by this tooth. There's cells at the leading edge of this developing tooth who like dissolve into the tooth ahead. That's how like when a crocodile's got teeth coming up, a lizard's got teeth that are keep coming up in the modern, we can look at that zoologically and see them like push their own teeth out of their mouth. So we can see that same pattern. So this is like a saber coming to replace the other saber for sure. Just cool. And so we do a lot. This animal is like obviously fantastic. So like if you want to come to the museum, you can see it. We have a printout in our exhibits. That's one of my babies. This is how big Dinogorgon could get. These are like the biggest fossils we have. So that's like an example of the one I showed you from Tanzania, that guy holding the lower saber. This is how big these animals were at their biggest. That's a human, just to be clear. So like, I think that's kind of fun. And then this is like probably before your guys' time, but like during COVID, we had a skulls exhibit at the museum. This was the logo. Isn't it great? The past president told us we couldn't use it because ISU's logo shouldn't be touched. I was like, oh, we used it anyway. But that was the logo for it. And again, if you want to see a cool gorgon, come to the museum. But these animals are just some of my favorites. There's lots of interesting things happening in the Permian. This is a mammal evolution, like 50-minute lecture, so we're not going to talk about all this cool stuff. But like this animal is also a mammal relative down here that we're going to talk about in a second. And so these ecosystems are really fun. They're really interesting. They're very complex. The insects are different. The plants are different. They're very alien. And this is all pre-dinosaurs, right? Nothing in this is a dinosaur. There won't be dinosaurs for another 30 million years or whatever still when this like painting is showing you a per time in Earth history, which is really great. This artist gave them some hair. I don't like it, but I can't tell them they're wrong. Does that make sense? Okay. So anyway, there's your gorgons. You can see they live for a while, but not all that long, mostly the middle and the late part of the Permian. One other clade of these therapsids I want you guys to see because I think they're really cool are some of these ones that keep going for a long time. This one goes all the way to the top of the purple, all the way to the end of the Triassic. This one, Cynodonts, that's you. These animals right here, Anobodonts, there's a clade within that group called Dicynodonts, and they're hilariously amazing. These animals do everything on the landscape, but they're almost all herbivores. There's big ones that are almost as big as elephants. There's little ones, like this one, that are burrowers, like moles. None of them are mammals. Many of them lose all of their teeth except for big tusks, and some of them are true, actual tusks, meaning they don't have any enamel on them, and they grow for their whole lives, and they get really long. Not mammals. So this is like the best clade possible for making that point where I'm like, many ways along the mammal synapsid stem lineage towards where you and I would come in. These animals have a bunch of features they share with us, but then what they do and how they diversify is incredibly non-mammalian. Most of them end up with like a keratinous beak, like a turtle on their face. So they're plant eaters with beaks, and some of them have tusks like elephants, and they're incredibly successful for many, many tens of millions of years, and they're found on every single continent. Some of them are huge, some of them are small, some of them burrow, some of them climb trees even. It's awesome. We're not going to talk about them today. But again, not very mammally, maybe. Would you agree with this? These are the animals that when I show people, like, here's our cousins, they're like, because these don't seem very mammally. I won't belabor it to you, but I just love them so much. They're often found in burrows. Here's a pair that are in a burrow. Oftentimes they can be found with juveniles in those same burrows, which is really interesting. So you can imagine them doing all that stuff. And then kind of just another fun fact for you guys. One of these animals is called Listrosaurus, and back in like the 1960s, it was like a huge deal because people found Listrosaurus in Antarctica, and they already knew about it from India and Australia, and that was like Africa and Madagascar. And so this is one of the animals among several plants and animals that had like the geologists being like, maybe continents used to be connected because I don't know how this like sausage lives in Antarctica and India and Africa, but nowhere else, unless you put Antarctica and India and Africa together. And of course, now we're like all in on that. And so it's just fun how fossils can do all kinds of different things. You can talk about biology, you can talk about mammal evolution, you can talk about continents, all using fossils. But all right, I want to jump into our clade. So this clade, Cynodonts, is a clade that you are all still in, and all mammals are still in. There's two features that Cynodonts evolved back in the Permian that you are all using today, right? Probably not using them right now. No one's chewing, right? But you have them, and you probably will use them today. So cusps on your teeth, especially your post-canine teeth, you've got your incisiform teeth, your caniniform teeth, and then your premolar malariform type teeth. Cynodonts are when mammal evolution really starts to get crazy in the teeth. Are you guys gonna talk about teeth a lot? Oh, he said, oh yeah. Not yet though? Oh, buckle up, it sucks so much. But it's really cool once you learn it. But man, is it a lot of words. Okay, so there's all these cusps on cynodont teeth, which is really, really, really important to mammal evolution. You'll talk about it. I'll tell you this, everything people do with mammal identification boils down almost totally to teeth if it's not DNA. So like here's just whatever, a whole bunch of different teeth and jaws. And there's differences there in the tooth cusps that every mammologist definitely knows everything about. So cusp evolution is a big deal, and it happens in cynodonts before we get to mammals. And then this is one of my favorites. Here's some cynodonts from the early part of the Triassic period. They're dead in a burrow together. And here's their skeleton. And it's in cynodonts that we think a diaphragm really evolves because they all have lumbar and thoracic vertebrae that are quite separate. All the other therapsids have ribs all the way down. So you can see here, right, that upright stance clearly came way before the diaphragm. That's not something you can know ahead of time, but with fossils, you can figure it out. Here's a cool direwolf, quite obviously a mammal that you guys probably don't have any problem with being a mammal. Thoracic lumbar. Here's a Thanaxodon 250 million years ago. Thoracic lumbar. Very cool. Cynodonts are pretty fun in the beginning of their evolution because they're the ones that are the most like hard to draw and show people because they look gross and weird. Like they're very mammally, but also not quite right. They're kind of, I don't know how you would describe like an animal like this. I don't think it has external ears. I don't really think it has hair. It's not great, right? It's still kind of sprawly. But these are our relatives, and there's lots and lots and lots of cool species of them. And so again, they evolved in this part of the Permian. They make it all the way up through till today. And so here's that mural I showed you. So this is the Zambian stuff. So a mural I commissioned a couple years ago. And so you've now seen some dicynodonts here and here. There's a big gorgon right there. And then this one and this one are both supposed to be those cynodonts. So these animals that are helping us get closer and closer to an animal that looks more mammally. So one thing that's really, 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 really a big deal in like the history of this planet are mass extinction events. Times when the Earth's abiotic factors are changing so rapidly at a global scale that life can't adapt fast enough is almost always what it really means. And so the biggest one ever happens at the end Permian, 252, just about, million years ago, is the worst extinction in all of Earth history. And our ancestors slash cousins, cynodonts, make it through that. So do some other therapsid clades too, that go for a while. Some go extinct, like those gorgons, they go extinct at this point. They never show up again. And so this is a really, really, really interesting thing because you guys probably think about mass extinctions is T-Rex dies and then mammals stand up. What I like is that synapsids are running everything in terms of being all the big and ecologically dominant speciose clades in the Permian. A mass extinction kills most of them. Dinosaurs evolve here and reptiles everywhere for the next 170 million years. Then an asteroid impact, and then mammals are like back in action, baby. And that's really cool that the synapsid lineage is like all the big animals now, and then now back to being all the big animals, but we call them mammals now, which is really cool, really freaky. And so if you look at Earth history, this is only the last 500 some million years. Earth's much older than that, but this is when we have good fossils for. And these are when those extinctions actually happen. And I've scaled these red bars to kind of like show you how severe they were. And so this is the asteroid that kills T-Rex for sure. But then right here, this is the end perm. So much, 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 much bigger event in terms of number of species that go extinct. And it's just interesting to think about because these are different filters that, again, we can test and interrogate to understand how evolution would have happened. It's also a big deal to me just to say that to your face, that mass extinctions aren't all uniform. There are very different causes for some of them compared to others, and very different impacts, very different time lengths that they go on for, very different recoveries from these events. But they're really, really, really important to understanding all the plants and animals around you today, because they all have ancestors that made it through these different filters. If you want to think of them that way. That's there. So after we got to the Permian, we're in these next couple periods. The Triassic is when Pangea is like at its maximum, which is really, really, really cool, I think. Lots of stuff going on, but in terms of you guys at this 50 minutes of lecture, what I like about the Triassic is in the aftermath of that mass extinction, this is what we might expect to have happen. Once things are okay-ish again, the survivors quickly speciate. They radiate. New forms evolve really fast for all clades, fishes and bivalves. Everybody's going like this and speciating really fast. On land, the first frogs, the first salamanders, the first crocodiles, the first turtles, the first probably really actually fuzzy mammal fuzzball things, the first dinosaurs, all show up at the same kind of window of time. Amazing. That's in response to the fact that the slate just got wiped really hard by an extinction event. Now they're all showing up. You guys obviously care about turtles and lizards and tuatara and mammals and crocs and dinosaurs because they're really important to our diversity today. I think that's amazing. During the Triassic, like I said, there's lots of diversity of animals that did survive and do re-radiate. I won't talk about them too much today because I'm looking at the time. Dicynodonts do all kinds of cool stuff. But this is one of those phenomena I'm talking about that's only known about from the fossil record. So here's like different periods in the Permian. Here's the extinction. And this is the real record of like Dicynodonts, these weirdos. Hugely diverse, crushed, but they do survive. And then they re-radiate again in the Triassic. A bunch of the ones that are in the Triassic, I just feel like you should see because they're crazy. These are the ones that get really, really big. Most of them have no teeth at all. They definitely have giant beaks on their face. They're all big, lumbering herbivores. And you don't maybe think of this as a mammal relative, but it really, really is actually not too far away from us. One of the biggest ones is this one called Liswichia. And this is when it got published. Everyone was so excited. There it is on the cover of Science because it's such a surprising animal. So right there next to it, true dinosaurs. And right here is a mammaliform cynodont that actually we think does have totally fur and milk and everything. And so this animal's still alive. There's dinosaurs running around. There's mammals running around. So some of these therapsids make it for quite a while, which is really fun. This synapsid lives in the same forest as some of the first like long-necked dinosaurs that aren't too huge yet. So it's really fun to imagine them like shuffling around past each other. That's very cool. Some Permian holdovers and some new Triassic blood, same place. Really cool. So again, I'm putting these slides up here. It's TMI, but you guys can read it if you want to later. There's lots of clades of cynodonts all throughout the Triassic. I don't think I'm going to talk about them too much right now, again, in the interest of time, but they're really ecologically diverse. They're not becoming mammals in a linear way. There's a whole radiation of them that become herbivorous. They get really wide teeth, molariform teeth, and really do a lot of really interesting things and have nothing to do with us. They go on their own way for 40 million years of time and become these interesting like herbivores on the landscape. One of the cynodont lineages, though, does get really tiny, and they're little burrowers for the most part. These are the probanignathans. These are the ones that we ultimately come from. It's in these tiny little guys. You can see they're getting kind of mammally in a general vibe kind of way in their face. They're the ones that have finally those jaw bones really, really, really reduced and almost totally up into that middle ear. They're smaller. Those teeny bones can then resonate when they hear sound, right? It's a smaller animal. You can hear higher frequency sound. It takes less energy to shake your little ear bones so you can hear better. Mammals are pretty good hearers. And finally, that squamosal bone and that dennary bone start to get really close. You guys are right now, squamosal dennary bone is your jaw joint. Amniotes have never had that until these probenathian cynodonts start to get really close, and eventually afterwards get that. So again, it's just fun to show you like what we have in the fossil record. Like these animals are not proper mammals, but boy, oh boy, are they getting really, 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 really close. And all we really have, of course, is their bony anatomy. But yeah, that dennary squamosal jaw joint shows up in animals like this one called Morganucodon. And they have these little burrowy ecologies, which is really cool. The next two periods are fun ones for most reasons, I think. The Jurassic period, Pangea breaks up. The world's nice and warm. There's no ice caps during the Jurassic period. Lots of really cool stuff's happening with dinosaurs. But what you guys should care about is that it's in the Jurassic that most of the like major lineages of what you guys would think of as mammals, meaning like platypuses and placental mammals, all those splits are happening in the Jurassic. So we'll talk about that there in a second. And so that goes from 200 million years to 145 million years. Stegosaurus goes right here. That's a Jurassic dinosaur. And then the next period is the Cretaceous, which goes from 145 up to 66. Really a long time. This is like the height of the continents being disconnected and oceans being really, really high. Again, no ice in the Cretaceous. Again, hilariously cool amounts of stuff happening in the world in terms of reptiles and pterodactyls and dinosaurs. We're not talking about that today. Flowers evolve in the Cretaceous. That's a big deal. But for you guys, we start to get full on like placental and marsupial mammals starting to show up as themselves in the Cretaceous. But when we talk about the Jurassic, when we talk about the Cretaceous, we talk about mammal evolution. This is what Jeremy's going to tell you about probably. This is what the fossil record turns into. Once mammals get small enough, they become a real pain. Small animals don't fossilize very well. They're too delicate. They get exploded. You can find them in very specific circumstances, but usually, if you can find a dinosaur bone that's this big, you're not going to find a mammal bone that's this big. So most of the mammal fossil record for the Cretaceous and the Jurassic is tooth record. Teeth are super durable. If you break a bunch of teeth off and throw them in a river, they're just like little pieces of gravel. You will find them as fossils, but they aren't connected to the rest of the animal very well. So this is a real picture of a real museum box full of thousands of actual mammal teeth, many species. It is possible to find whole skeletons of mammals in the Jurassic and the Cretaceous. It's just not very common. And so animals like this one and this one become incredibly important scientifically because they'll tell us about the whole rest of the animal's ecology, things like locomotion and body size, beyond just teeth. Excuse me. So here's our cynodonts we were just talking about. And then, like I said, in the Jurassic, there's this huge explosion of mammals. And so this is a really simplified diagram. It's showing you the exact same kinds of things as the other slides in terms of like different clades and when they existed in time and how they're related to each other. But like, where would we draw the line and say what's a mammal and what's not a mammal? Once we're up into these Jurassic cynodonts, it's a really interesting scientific question. It's also kind of like whatever, because we're just making up the label. But where are we going to say you're a mammal now? And so what I wanted to have you guys do, you can look at this if you want, but even if you just think about it, talk to your neighbors for a minute here. What makes sense when you're looking at like the living organisms and all these fossils as like a place that you can argue with another scientist to draw the line and say, this counts now as a frog. Everything after this is frog. Here's the line for mammals. So chat with each other for a second. What makes sense to you as like criteria for like making the distinction? Go ahead and chat about that for a second. So what are some things? What are some things that we could talk about as being reasonable, right? There's several answers to this question, so you know I'm not looking for one. Yeah. Mammary glands. Do we like it? What if I tell you you have a pile of teeth and occasional skeletons to work with? Then what? I'm not saying that's wrong or anything, but it's a limitation to the mammary gland argument. Yeah. Docodons. One of the best words to say. Okay, docodons. Okay. So you're wondering maybe docodons are what I said earlier, that diphyodon, like you are, they only have two replacement teeth. So kind of like I would argue that's a lot like mammary glands. It's an anatomical trait that you'll choose to be like the mammal trait. You could choose it. What else? Every clade has this problem. I heard you guys talking about ornithology. What's a bird? Love it. Same thing. It's the exact same question. What else? What other possibilities even are there for making the cutoff? The diaphragm thing. So again, mammary glands maybe, diphyodon maybe, a diaphragm maybe. If it's the diaphragm, your mammal definition is going to go back to the Permian for some of those cynodons, and I don't think that's bad necessarily. But that means you're going to call a lot of animals mammals. And what's funny is if you guys actually like study like the history of science, scientists are such weird dorks sometimes. And you'll have like people who study modern day biology who don't want to hear anything about some stupid Triassic animal being a mammal. It obviously like walks like this. It isn't a mammal. So one other option you have, honestly, is to use what's alive right now. It's all just the words that we care about, right? Only humans care what we call. None of these animals care if you think they're a mammal or not. Elephants don't care if you think they're mammals. But we care because we need words. And so one thing you could do is take all the living animals that you say are mammals and whatever their common ancestor is, that's it. And so we could do that. This is placental mammal lineage. This is marsupial mammal lineage. Here's platypus echidna lineage. So you could draw a line down to the bottom there. Say, here's Therian mammals, placentals and marsupials. Here's mammals. And if you're over here, docodons, this guy, non-mammalian mammaliform, what you are. Everybody after that's a mammal. I don't think that's a bad call because who cares? You have to do it somehow. But what if, for fun, what if the 5 species of echidna and platypus we had actually were extinct? Then this would become mammal, right? And so it's kind of a by chance that there just happens to be a weird platypus in Australia right now. So then all these get to be called mammals. And by chance, maybe what if these didn't exist anymore? Then that would be mammals. Again, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I think it's fun for you guys to think about it. And again, scientists like me who are doing fossils, we can't look at hair or mammary glands. We have to look at what's actually preserved. And so things like that dentary squamosal jaw joint, that shows up way down here. So some of these animals, Cynoconodon, one from China, that's really important. It's right here in the Jurassic. You know, should that be the first mammal? I don't think it matters, but like it's really fun to debate about. And I think as for you guys as students, it's fun to think about. Every clade on the planet has the exact same question for it. And we've picked for most of them at this point that are vertebrates anyway. So it's just something for you to think about because I think it's interesting. We got 3 minutes left. What will I show you in 3 minutes? Some of these cool Mesozoic mammals, maybe. This is one from Arizona called Kyantotherium. It's one of these ones that's like really early. They just found a fossil a few years ago that everybody freaked out about because it was a big skull of an adult with 27 baby skulls all with it. And what's cool is if you mass estimate those little babies and you add them all up, the weight of the mother and the weight of its brood are really close to what we get in like a dog with her puppies or a human female with her baby. The weight ratio is the same, but there's 27 instead of a couple. So that's a really fun thing where you're like, wow, is this kind of like a reptile number of babies to have? Does she care for them? I don't know, but she had a lot of them. Fun kind of mammal biology happening. Something I want you guys to know about is Mesozoic mammals aren't all just little weirdos. They evolved to do all kinds of things that you know mammals today to do. This is one of those docodonts. It's called Castrocata. That means beaver tail because it has a big paddle tail and it's like a semi-aquatic docodont. Nothing to do with a placental mammal, certainly nothing to do with rodents, certainly nothing to do with beavers, but it lives a beaverish life back in the Jurassic. Look at that pterodactyl. Sweet. I'm not going to talk too much about platypuses and echidnas, although we have plenty of fossils of them. One of my favorite things about platypuses and echidna fossils is that we find them in Antarctica, South America, and Australia. So they used to be much more distributed than they are now. I'm going to click here just to show you one more of those because of the time. And this clade, Eutriconodons, we get several evolutions of like a flying squirrel morphology. They have skin stretched between their wrists and ankles for gliding around in trees. You guys might hear about it in this class, but there's like 6 different times mammals today have evolved gliding. It's not just flying squirrels. And here's a bunch of totally not even the same kind of mammal animals that have evolved really similar freaky wrists for flying around up in the sky. The other thing that's cool is some of these mammals get kind of big and are carnivorous. And so especially this one called a Rapenamammus has been found with like baby dinosaurs in its guts. So it's like a badger-sized animal, but running around. Even though mammals are usually shown getting eaten by big dinosaurs, there's definitely a couple instances where you got decent-sized mammals eating little dinosaurs, which I think is really, really, really fun. I'll stop with this slide. Here's our lineage, the therian mammals, meaning marsupials and placentals. And what I like about the earliest mammals that are related to us, this one's called Yomaya, aka the Dawn Mother. Isn't that heavy? It's called Yomaya. Look at its little skeleton. What do you notice about it? It has this like carbon ring, and under a microscope, it does. It has little hair. And so, of course, by the time we're getting to an animal that should be on the placental mammal side of things, it better have hair, because that means marsupials and platypuses are already over there. But still, it's fun to see it as a fossil. And so here's another one, Cynodelphis. That means Chinese possum. Jurassic Mother, Jeremiah, blah, blah, blah. Lots of fun animals here to talk about. And I'll stop blabbing because you guys have to go. But I'll show you some pretty art before I leave. Again, once we get into the Cretaceous, there's all kinds of awesome things happening, but that's what we were doing in the Cretaceous. We don't have time to talk about it because class is over, but I would have talked about this next if we did, but oh well. Yeah, of course. Yeah, you can look at the slides, that's for sure.